What we're announcing today is really a survey that was done specifically to ask Cincinnati residents what they think about the city funding human services. 5 questions were asked in June and July and then assembled and released just recently in terms of a telephone survey that was done by the Institute for Policy Research at the University of Cincinnati. The 5 questions that were asked, one was, do you favor the city funding human services? 94% said they supported strongly or somewhat supported the city funding human services. Of that 94%, 70.9% strongly supported. So in that general question, there was broad public support, and those are residents of Cincinnati, for funding human services. The second question was a bit more specific. Do you favor using a portion of the city budget for funding human services? And 86.7% said that they favored using a portion of the city budget for funding human services. So once again, that was strongly or somewhat supported. It went down a little bit to strongly supported was 53%, but still a very strong endorsement for funding of human services. Ed, you handled a couple of the questions.
There was a third question that was intended to find out if the public's view of human services matched up with those that were being funded by the city. And it turns out to be a very knowledgeable citizenry, a very knowledgeable response. The top 5 answers, the top 3 answers they had were helping people in need through services for families and individuals, services and aid for low income and poor people, and services that benefit the community and the quality of life. These were open-ended questions, and yet the public landed exactly where the city's funding patterns have been. And this was a way to make sure that we were all talking about the same thing. And then we asked them, what do you know about this? They've already indicated that they were very much in favor of funding public services. But the question was, do you realize that the city is funding public services, and what do you know about it? And the answers here were less strong. Less than half of the people were aware that the city was funding human services. And then we went to the next question, are you aware that the services have been cut? It was almost 2/3 of the population was not aware of the cut. So from a human services organization advocacy standpoint, there is a need to get the information out there to be clearer with the public. But it says time and again that there is overall large support, overwhelming support for public dollars as a part of the fabric of funding for human services. And that's our conclusion from the study. One thing that I would add, just if I may, is that, as Bill said, these were all city voters. More than 3/4 of the respondents are registered voters. So it's a very knowledgeable, very stable population that responded to these questions.
One of the reasons these questions were asked in a survey was cities had a policy from 1981 really to the 2005 budget of supporting human services by 1.5% of the budget. Then in the 2005 budget, this began to change and they began to reduce the funding. So the question arose, what does the public know about this, and do they support the policy that's been in place for so long of funding human services? So that's really why these questions were asked and put together. And we wanted them to put together in such a way that they would really be solid. So that's why we had the Institute for Policy Research at UC do it as part of their telephone survey of residents. So that's generally what we have here is some civic leaders and religious leaders, like Peg Fox, who's the executive director of MARC. They Russo O'Neill, Reverend Russo O'Neill. We have Rena Saperstein, who's the president of the League of Women Voters. Jackie Hobart, president of the City Club, and Steve Johns of Citizens for Civic Renewal, who are here they've generally been supportive of funding of human services, so we asked them to be here today to make a few remarks. Do you have questions before that? About this?
Where do you go from here?
Well, we thought this was important information to get out because of the budget being made. So we'll try to get this out to the community as much as we can. That's why we have the press conference today. I think some of the human service funders and some of the civic groups that support this will take this information and put it to good use themselves, because this is an election year and it's also a budget making year, so this will obviously be put to use in that regard.
We've shared it with all the city council members and with the mayor's office and the manager's office, and we see it as an important additional piece of information that they should have as they go about doing their work.
To what do you attribute the disconnect between the public policy and the public opinion here?
Well, that's anybody's guess. I mean, for years and years the city had this policy in place. I think originally it was done in the 2005 budget, which was made up by City Manager Lemmy and Mayor Lucan at the time, and that's what opened the gate for the cuts. City Council has generally, at least verbally, been supportive of this, but they've continued to make some cuts in human services. So I think there's support in City Hall for this, but it certainly shows that the public out there sees that human services are a need in the community, and I think they go along with the policy that the city is be a partner in the funding of human services, as they have since 1981, really. So I don't really know how to answer that, because that's one of those questions that's kind of unanswerable.
To what do you attribute the disconnect between the public not knowing about the budget cuts or having a good understanding of the big changes that were made to the budget?
I think it's a function of, in part, of media coverage. It's a function of the emphasis upon public safety and the less intentional examination of human services. But in the long run, I think that what it should say to the human service agencies is that it's very important that they inform their board members and their constituents as to how this works and how important it is to their basic budgets. So
the city budget is a complicated document. It gets often voted on at the last minute. So I think the public often, unless you're a real aficionado of what's happening at City Hall, you often miss some of the details that budget process.